A rich boy poured red wine on a black CEO's suit. His parents laughed. They didn't know that moment would cost them $650 million. When 12-year-old Marcus Hale walked into the glass-walled boardroom on the 47th floor, everything stopped. Not gradually, not politely. It was as if the room itself inhaled and forgot how to breathe. Conversations died mid-syllable. A silver pen froze in the air. Somewhere, an assistant's tablet slipped from numb fingers and hit the carpet with a sound that was far too loud for a room this expensive. Marcus stood just inside the doorway, small against the sweep of glass and skyline. His shoes were scuffed, the toes curling slightly where he'd outgrown them. The collar of his pale blue school uniform was soaked through, red wine dripping steadily down his chest, splashing onto the white marble floor below. The liquid spread in slow, deliberate lines, like something alive, like a mistake that refused to stay contained. Someone laughed. It was quick, automatic, the kind of laugh people make when they assume power is on their side. Marcus flinched, just slightly, not from the sound, but from the certainty behind it. The smell of wine cut through the room's carefully curated scent of polished wood and citrus cleaner. It didn't belong here. Neither did he. Everyone could see that. He knew it too. His fingers were clenched into fists so tight his knuckles had gone pale. His arms locked stiff at his sides like he was afraid movement would make everything worse. At the far end of the table, a man leaned back in his chair, amused, already reaching for his phone. A woman beside him whispered something behind a manicured hand. Security took a step forward, then hesitated. No one had given a signal yet. Marcus swallowed. His throat burned. His eyes did not leave the floor. He started, then stopped. The word fell apart before it made it out of his mouth. For a moment, it seemed like the room might recover, like someone would intervene, usher him out, erase him. That was how things usually went. A problem appeared. It was removed. The meeting continued. But Marcus lifted his head. His face was flushed, not just with embarrassment, but with something sharper. Determination, maybe, or fear that had finally gotten tired of being quiet. A dark bruise shadowed the skin beneath his left eye, half hidden, half ignored. His lips trembled, then pressed together as if he were bracing himself against a wave only he could see coming. "I didn't mean to spill it," he said. His voice was thin but clear, cutting through the room more effectively than shouting ever could. Heads turned fully now, eyes narrowed, smiles faded. "I just wanted to see how it felt." He paused, breath hitching, fingers tightening further. To be invisible. The words landed wrong. Not clumsy, not childish. Wrong in the way a truth does when it arrives somewhere it was never invited. Silence swallowed the room. No one laughed this time. Marcus stood there, wine still dripping from his uniform, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might crack his ribs. He hadn't planned to say that. He'd practiced something else, something safer. But the room had felt so big, and he had felt so small, and the words slipped out before he could stop them. Across the table, a woman with iron gray hair and eyes sharp enough to slice glass slowly lowered her pen. She didn't look at the wine. She didn't look at the floor. She looked at Marcus. Really looked. Something shifted. It wasn't loud. There was no announcement, no dramatic gesture, just a subtle tightening of the air, like a storm deciding whether or not to break. Outside the windows, the city kept moving, oblivious. Deals were being made. Fortunes were shifting. Somewhere far below, traffic honked and people hurried through crosswalks, unaware that in a room 4 to 7 floors above them, a child had just done something dangerous. He had spoken honestly, and no one in that room yet understood what honesty was about to cost them. This was a place where voices were polished, where every sentence had been rehearsed before it was spoken, sanded smooth of anything sharp or unnecessary. It was a place where silence was currency, where saying nothing at the right moment was often worth more than speaking at all. And mistakes were forgiven here, yes, but only if they were expensive enough to prove you belonged. Kids didn't belong here. Not ever, and especially not kids like Marcus. The boardroom stretched long and narrow, a corridor of power framed by floor-to-ceiling glass. Outside, the city glittered under the late morning sun, skyscrapers standing shoulder to shoulder like rivals pretending to be allies. Inside, everything was muted. The carpet swallowed sound. The chairs were leather soft, molded to bodies that expected comfort as a right, not a privilege. The room smelled like oak and citrus and money, a carefully engineered scent meant to suggest confidence without warmth. 12 executives sat around the table, jackets draped just so, watches catching the light when they moved their hands. Every one of them looked like they belonged. Every one of them knew it. At the head of the table sat Veronica Steele. She was still, not frozen, contained. Her posture was immaculate, spine straight, hands resting lightly near a slim leather folder. Her expression gave nothing away. No irritation, no amusement, just attention, focused and sharp, like a blade drawn, but not yet swung. People often mistook her calm for kindness. They had learned better eventually. Across from her lounged Elliot Grayson, legs stretched forward, one ankle casually hooked over the other. His suit was perfectly tailored, his cufflinks understated but unmistakably rare. He wore comfort the way other people wore confidence. This room had been built for him, long before he ever entered it. Elliot's mouth curved into a slow smirk, the kind that suggested he'd already decided how this story would end. Beside him, his parents sat close. His father relaxed, fingers laced behind his head. His mother sipping water like she was watching a mildly entertaining performance. Neither of them looked surprised. If anything, they looked pleased. Security shifted near the wall. One guard adjusted his stance, hand hovering near his radio. Another glanced at Veronica. Waiting. Waiting was their specialty. Authority flowed from the top here, and no one moved until it told them to. A voice cut through the tension, low but audible. Is this a joke? It wasn't directed at Marcus. It didn't need to be. The words floated out into the room like a test balloon, measuring how much cruelty the moment could hold before anyone objected. Marcus felt all of it. The space, the eyes, the way the room seemed to press down on him from every direction. He stood alone at the end of the table, his shoes too small, toes aching where the leather pinched. His socks didn't quite match. His uniform, still damp at the collar, clung uncomfortably to his skin. He forced his shoulders back. It wasn't instinct. It was practice. Someone had taught him, maybe with words. Maybe without that standing tall made you harder to knock over. That if you looked steady enough, people might hesitate before pushing. His chin lifted a fraction. His hands stayed clenched at his sides, nails biting into his palms to keep them from shaking. He didn't belong here, and everyone knew it. But Marcus didn't look at the executives. He didn't look at Elliot or his parents or the security guards, waiting to escort him out of existence. His eyes stayed forward, fixed somewhere just past the center of the table, like he was anchoring himself to an invisible point. For the first time, the contrast became unbearable. A child, damp with wine, standing in a room built to erase consequences. A room where power laughed quietly and expected the world to laugh with it. And somewhere beneath the polished surfaces an expensive calm. The tension thickened not because a child had entered the room, but because he had stayed standing. Berenice's eyes didn't go to the wine. They passed over the stain on the marble, the damp color, the quiet panic still trembling in the air, and settled instead on the faint bruise beneath Marcus's left eye. It wasn't fresh. The color had already begun to fade into sickly yellows and greens. The way pain looks when it's been carried for a while, long enough to be hidden, long enough to be explained away. Her gaze sharpened, not with accusation, but with recognition. Who did that to you? She asked. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but it cut through the room more cleanly than any raised tone could have. Several heads turned. Someone shifted in their chair. Elliot Grayson stopped smirking, just for a moment. Marcus felt the question land like a hand on his chest. He shrugged. It was a reflex, practiced and automatic, a movement perfected by children who learn early that the truth is rarely rewarded. His shoulders lifted, dropped again, as if the bruise had simply appeared there on its own. It's nothing. The words came out easily. Too easily. Veronica didn't respond right away. She didn't challenge him. She didn't soften her expression into pity or harden it into suspicion. She simply waited. Silence has weight when you let it sit long enough. The room, so used to being filled with voices, with confident interruptions and strategic agreements, had no idea what to do with that kind of quiet. Marcus could feel it pressing in on him, urging him to fill the space, to retreat, to disappear again. He swallowed. His eyes flicked briefly toward Elliot and then to Elliot's parents. His father's laugh echoed in his head, sharp and familiar. The sound he made whenever someone flinched, whenever someone didn't know whether they were allowed to be offended. My dad says it's funny, Marcus said at last. His voice cracked on the word dad. Just once. He hated that it did. His jaw tightened, and when he spoke again, he forced the sound steady, older than it should have been. He says it's funny when people get uncomfortable. Marcus continued. He says it builds character. The sentence hung there, unfinished in all the ways that mattered. No one laughed this time. Veronica felt something shift behind her ribs. Not anger, not yet. Something colder, more deliberate. She could hear the echo of that phrase, builds character, layered over countless boardroom justifications she'd heard in her life. The words people used when harm needed a costume. Marcus stared at a spot on the table, the polished wood reflecting a warped version of his face back at him. He hadn't meant to say that much. He'd already said too much. His hands trembled now, and he shoved them into the pockets of his too-tight trousers, fingers curling around lint and loose threads. The room waited again, and today mattered. Marcus said suddenly, the words tumbling out as if they'd been fighting to escape. He hadn't planned to add that. He hadn't planned anything after the spill. But once the truth starts moving, it doesn't always stop where you want it to. His voice dropped, barely above a whisper, because he said if I did something big. He hesitated, breath catching. Everyone would finally look at me. That did it. Not the wine, not the interruption, not the breach of protocol. That sentence, for the first time since Marcus had entered the room, the contrast sharpened into something painful. A child who believed visibility had to be earned through humiliation. A boy who thought being seen required sacrifice. Veronica leaned back slightly in her chair, her expression unreadable, but her attention absolute. Marcus stood there, exposed in ways no spill could ever manage, his secret laid bare in front of people who had spent their lives deciding whose discomfort was acceptable collateral. He didn't cry. He didn't ask for help. He had only answered the question he'd been asked, and in doing so, he had quietly dared the room to decide what kind of people they were going to be. The moment cracked open all at once. An assistant hurried forward, heels clicking to fast against the carpet. A stack of white napkins clutched to her chest like an offering. She knelt, blotting at the wine as if the stain were the real emergency, as if cleaning it quickly enough might rewind what had already been said. Another executive leaned toward the center of the table, voice low, practiced. This is inappropriate. We should remove him. The words were calm, reasonable, dangerous in their simplicity. Someone laughed again, shorter this time, thinner. A nervous sound meant to test the room, to see if cruelty was still permitted under the guise of discomfort. It echoed once, then died. Marcus didn't move. He felt the instinct to shrink, to apologize again, to offer himself up as the problem so the adults could continue being comfortable. His shoulders tensed, bracing for hands on his arms, for the polite firmness of being escorted out. Instead, a chair scraped softly against the floor. Veronica still stood. The movement was unhurried, deliberate enough that it drew every eye in the room. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't ask permission. She simply rose to her full height, a quiet interruption that carried more authority than shouting ever could. She slipped her blazer from her shoulders. The fabric was dark, tailored perfectly, expensive in a way that didn't need announcing. She stepped around the table and stopped in front of Marcus. He looked up at her, startled, unsure whether to step back or stand still. She placed the blazer around his shoulders, not draped, not tossed, placed carefully, as if it were always meant to be there. The weight of it surprised him. The warmth, too. It smelled faintly of clean fabric and something sharp, purposeful. Marcus's hands hovered awkwardly at his sides, then slowly closed around the edges of the jacket. Anchoring himself, Veronica handed him a glass of water. Her hands didn't shake. She didn't perform concern. No cameras, no dramatic sighs. Just a simple gesture offered at eye level. Drink, she said quietly. He did. Only after Marcus had taken a sip did. Veronica turned back to the room. This isn't about a spill, she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it traveled. It filled the space where laughter had been moments ago, leaving no room for interruption. It's about what kind of people we reward when no one thinks it costs them anything. The words landed hard. A few executives straightened in their chairs. One man cleared his throat and thought better of speaking. The assistant froze mid-motion, napkin still in her hands, suddenly unsure whether to keep cleaning or stop. Across the table, Elliot Grayson scoffed. It was reflexive, almost bored. Come on, he said, spreading his hands slightly. It's not that deep. His father smiled, slow and indulgent, the kind of smile that had smoothed over countless moments just like this. The smile of a man used to consequences bending away from him. Veronica met neither of their gazes. Her eyes remained on the room as a whole. on the collective that had been so quick to minimize, to excuse, to redirect attention back to comfort. "We are not removing him," she said. The sentence was flat, final. Security hesitated, then stepped back. Veronica turned then, finally, to Elliot and his parents. Her expression hadn't hardened, but something in it had sharpened. Edges revealed where before there had only been restraint. "You think this is about embarrassment," she continued, "about a child who broke etiquette." She paused. "I think it's about power teaching itself how far it's allowed to go." No one interrupted. Marcus stood wrapped in a borrowed blazer, pulse still racing, realizing something he'd never felt before in a room full of adults like this. For the first time, someone had chosen him without calculating the cost, and Veronica Steele, standing between a child and a system built to excuse itself, had already decided that whatever came next was worth paying for. By noon, the story had already slipped its leash. It started as a whisper in the lobby, an assistant texting a friend, a security guard repeating what he'd seen to someone who knew someone. By mid-afternoon, it had shape. By evening, it had momentum. A child, a boardroom, a spill no one could clean away. Names were dropped carefully at first, then less so. Screens lit up. Calls went unanswered. The city did what it always did with power. It leaned it out. By the next morning, Veronica Steele walked into Grayson Academy. The campus was immaculate, its stone pathways lined with trimmed hedges and banners celebrating achievement. The kind of place where reputations were cultivated early and protected fiercely. Parents' names were etched into plaques. Futures were assumed, not earned. Veronica didn't arrive with lawyers, that alone unsettled people. She arrived with board members, men and women whose presence signaled consequence without spectacle. Their footsteps echoed through the front hall, measured and unhurried. Students watched from behind glass doors, sensing something was off but not yet knowing why. The principal greeted them with a tight smile. There were handshakes, polite confusion, a request to move to the conference room. No shouting, no threats, just gravity. They sat. The school counselor joined them, posture stiff, already aware that this was not a meeting to be managed. Marcus sat at the end of the table, hands folded in his lap. Veronica's blazer folded neatly beside him. He hadn't been asked to speak. He hadn't been asked to leave either. That mattered. Veronica asked questions, not accusations, questions about behavioral reports that had been minimized, about boys will be, boys incidents logged and forgotten. About how often discomfort had been reframed as resilience. The principal answered carefully, the counselor less so. Words piled up, cautious and circular, until the truth began to show through the gaps. Patterns emerged. Silence acquired a shape. That afternoon, the Grayson parents were called in. They arrived confident, offended, even. Elliot slouched into a chair, irritation flickering across his face. His father spoke first, tone genial, dismissive, already angling toward resolution. Veronica let him finish. Then she placed a single folder on the table. Inside were timestamps, statements, decisions made when no one thought they would be reviewed. It wasn't dramatic. It was thorough. The kind of thoroughness that doesn't need to raise his voice. "This isn't about your son alone," Veronica said. "It's about what your influence protects." No one argued after that. There was nothing left to argue with. By nightfall, the press was circling. Veronica didn't delay. She didn't soften the message or bury it in corporate language. At precisely 8 p.m., her statement went live. "The Grayson Consortium no longer aligns with our values. The $650 million deal is canceled." That was it. No insults, no explanations, just a line drawn where compromise had once lived. Phones exploded across the city. Boardrooms lit up. Analysts scrambled. The stock dipped sharply before stabilizing. The market reacting the way it always does to uncertainty, loudly, then cautiously. In one penthouse office, laughter stopped mid-sentence. In another, a screen refreshed again and again, as if the numbers might change out of embarrassment. And somewhere far from the cameras, Marcus sat quietly at home, watching the news scroll past without commentary, without celebration. For the first time, the silence wasn't empty. It was heavy with consequence. The kind that settles in after power realizes it has finally been seen. Change didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic overnight shift, no single ruling or headline that fixed what had taken years to harden into place. What followed was quieter than the scandal, slower than outrage ever allows. It happened in weekly check-ins, not courtrooms. in rooms with bad coffee and ticking clocks, where progress wasn't measured in statements, but in whether people showed up again the next week. Marcus learned that first at 12. He had mastered apology as survival, quick, automatic, head down, a reflex meant to make adults comfortable before they decided to be cruel. Now, in a small office overlooking a park, he sat across from a counselor and practiced something unfamiliar. Saying sorry without disappearing. It felt wrong at first. Exposed, like standing without armor. He learned to say, "I'm sorry," and keep his shoulders straight. To meet someone's eyes instead of scanning for exits. Some days he reverted. Some days he went quiet. No one rushed him. No one punished the pauses. That was new too. Elliot's change came differently. He was removed from the board track program without ceremony. No announcement. No public disgrace. Just in a mail, brief and unmistakable. Counseling was mandatory. Attendance tracked. Excuses irrelevant. For the first time in his life, influence didn't bend consequences away from him. He hated it. The counselor didn't rise to his bait. Didn't argue when Elliot insisted it was all exaggerated. Instead, she asked questions that didn't have clever answers. About why laughter felt safer than curiosity. About what it meant to be entertained by someone else's discomfort. Progress was uneven. Some sessions ended early. Some ended with silence thick enough to bruise. But Elliot kept coming back not because he wanted to, but because this time, leaving wasn't an option. Veronica watched all of this from a careful distance. She didn't position herself as a rescuer. She never framed Marcus as a lesson. Once a month, they met for lunch, sometimes in her office, sometimes in a diner Marcus chose because the fries were good and no one cared who you were. She asked about school, about books, about what made him angry lately. She listened more than she spoke. When Marcus stumbled, she didn't soften the world for him. She explained it. When he succeeded, she didn't overpraise. She acknowledged it, steady and real. What she offered wasn't rescue. It was consistency that mattered more. And then there was Marcus's father. At first, he called it overreach, then betrayal, then politics. He blamed everyone except himself until the numbers stopped moving in his favor, until doors that once opened automatically began to close. Losing money did what lectures never could. It stripped away insulation. Therapy wasn't his idea, but he went. The first sessions were defensive, jokes sharpened into shields. But eventually, without an audience to perform for, something cracked, not all at once, in pieces. He began to hear his own words echoed back to him. Without laughter to soften them, the phrase builds character sounded different in that room. Months passed. No one was redeemed in a single arc. No one emerged clean, but patterns loosened. Apologies landed differently. Silence was used less like a weapon and more like a space to think. Marcus grew taller. His voice deepened. He stopped flinching when adults disagreed with him. Elliot learned how to sit with discomfort without turning it into a joke. And Veronica kept showing up not because it made headlines, but because this was the work that followed after the noise died down. Change, it turned out, wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate. And for the first time, that was enough. 6 years later, the auditorium was full. Not the polite kind of full that came with obligation, but the charged, restless fullness of a moment people knew they would remember. Rows of folding chairs stretched beneath soft lights, programs whispering as they were folded and unfolded again. Parents leaned forward. Teachers scanned the stage. Cameras hovered, ready but restrained. Marcus stood behind the podium, waiting for the signal. He had grown into himself, taller now, shoulders broader, posture easy in a way that couldn't be taught. The nervous energy he felt wasn't fear. It was gravity, the awareness that words, once spoken, "Don't come back," when his name was called. The room quieted. He stepped forward and adjusted the microphone, the small metallic click echoing through the hall. His hands were steady. That surprised him. Once, his palms would have been slick with sweat, fingers searching for something to hold onto. Now they rested easily on the edges of the podium. He looked out at the crowd. Faces blurred together at first, smiles, expectant eyes, proud tears already forming. Then he found her. Veronica sat in the front row, hands folded in her lap, posture unchanged by time or circumstance. She didn't smile when their eyes met. She simply nodded, once, as if to say, "I'm here." Marcus took a breath. People think power is loud. He said. His voice carried easily, warm and controlled, filling the space without effort. He let the sentence sit, resisting the urge to rush past it. The auditorium leaned in. But the loudest moment of my life, he continued, was when someone didn't laugh. A murmur rippled through the room, not confusion, but recognition. He saw it in the way shoulders shifted, in the way some parents stilled their hands. Marcus paused. In that silence, memory surfaced uninvited. A boardroom 47 floors up. Red wine on white marble. A room that had once taught him how small he was supposed to feel. He let the memory pass through him, without tightening around it. He went on. There are a lot of ways to protect people. He said, you can protect their image, their status, their comfort. His gaze flicked briefly to the administrator seated along the side wall, then returned to the crowd. But that's not family. The words came slower now, each one placed carefully. Family isn't who protects your reputation, Marcus said. It's who protects your dignity. The silence that followed was absolute. No immediate applause. No cheers, just stillness, thick and deliberate. Some truths don't invite reaction, they demand reflection first. A woman in the second row pressed a hand to her mouth. A man to Rose's back lowered his head, eyes shining. A teacher swallowed hard. Veronica didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on Marcus, unblinking. Her expression as controlled as it had been years ago in that boardroom. But her hands had tightened together slightly, knuckles pale. It was the only sign of emotion she allowed herself. Marcus felt it then, not triumph, not closure, but something steadier. Completion. When the applause finally came, it wasn't explosive. It rolled in slowly, wave by wave, until it filled the room and lifted people to their feet. Marcus stepped back from the podium, heart pounding, breath shallow, with something dangerously close to tears. He didn't cry. He smiled instead, small and genuine, and caught Veronica's eye one last time as he left the stage. 6 years earlier, a child had asked what it felt like to be invisible. Now, standing in the echo of applause that hadn't rushed to meet him, Marcus understood the answer. Being seen had never been about volume. It had always been about presence. Afterward, when the auditorium had emptied and the echoes of applause had settled into memory, Marcus found Veronica standing just beyond the stage doors. The hallway smelled faintly of flowers and floor polish. Graduates clustered with families nearby, laughter rising and falling in uneven waves. Cameras flashed. Names were called. Futures were discussed loudly, optimistically, as if certainty were something you could claim by speaking it aloud. Veronica waited until Marcus reached her. She didn't pull him into a hug. She didn't offer congratulations the way others had, full of exclamation points and pride that spilled over itself. Instead, she reached into her pocket and placed a small object into his palm, a pen. It was simple, matte black, balanced in a way that felt intentional the moment his fingers closed around it. Marcus turned it once, then twice, until he saw the engraving along the side. Seen. The word caught in his chest. Not polished, not inspirational, just true. For a moment, he couldn't speak. He remembered other objects from his life, things given with conditions attached. Praise that came with expectations, approval that could be withdrawn. This was different. It didn't ask him to become anything else. It acknowledged what already was. He looked up at her and smiled, a real one, unguarded. You showed up, he said. The words weren't dramatic. They didn't need to be. They carried 6 years of meaning, compressed into a single sentence. 6 years of lunches that weren't canceled, of hard conversations that weren't rushed, of silence that wasn't abandonment. Veronica nodded once. I told you I would, she said. They stood there for a moment longer, not lingering, not rushing, just present. Then Marcus was pulled away by classmates, by parents, by the forward motion of a life beginning again. Veronica watched him go. She didn't follow. She didn't need to. Showing up, she had learned, wasn't about staying forever. It was about arriving when it mattered and leaving something solid behind. Outside, the late afternoon sun cut across the steps of the building. Marcus paused there, graduation cap in one hand, the pen in the other. He ran his thumb over the engraved word once more, before slipping it carefully into his jacket pocket. He knew when he would use it, not for signatures that demanded authority, not for documents meant to impress, but for moments that required intention. Letters that needed honesty, notes meant to be read slowly. He descended the steps and merged into the crowd, just another graduate on a day full of beginnings. But somewhere in the distance, a question lingered, quiet, insistent, unavoidable. What would you do if a child asked you for help in a room full of power? Not loudly, not dramatically, just honestly. Would you laugh, assuming the room belonged to you? Would you look away, trusting someone else to handle it? Or would you do the harder thing, the quieter thing, and show up? Because power is always watching itself, waiting to see what it can get away with. And change doesn't start with speeches or deals or headlines. It starts when someone decides that dignity is not negotiable. Be someone who shows up,